Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory in for Estig the Yacht. It's Friday, January 28th. This is Africa 54.
The death count from Tropical Storm Anna rises to 88 as a second storm brews to the continent's east. Why are Kenyan pastoralists embracing fishing? We'll explain. And pro-Russian sentiment grows in Burkina Faso following the coup.
Tropical storm Anna has killed at least 88 people across southern and eastern Africa, with the recovery operations still ongoing as another storm threatened more severe weather. Storm Anna passed over Madagascar on January 22nd, adding to days of already intense rainfall. The country declared a state of disaster on Thursday night, reporting a rise in the death toll from Anna to 48, with people killed by landslides and collapsing buildings or washed away. Anna then made landfall in Mozambique on January 24th, where 20 have been reported dead before moving inland to Malawi, where it triggered massive power cuts. Now, authorities in Malawi said that at least 19 people died and more than 100 were seriously injured in 15 districts after more than a week of heavy rains and floods. More than 200,000 people from 48,000 households, many of them displaced, have been affected due to the devastation caused by Tropical Storm Anna, according to the Department of Disaster Management Affairs. Malawi's Disaster Commissioner Charles Kalimba said on Thursday food is urgently needed for people who are camping out.
From the forecast from meteorological services, we will now enter the interconvergence tropical zone rain-bearing system, which means we will still be having rains and people need somewhere to stay. But more than shelter, we need food to give to all the people who are camping. Because as we are also traveling, most of the maize that people had in their houses has been destroyed. The maize is rotten and people don't have anything.
We have had floods previously, but they've never reached this extent. Yes, Mwanza River could overflow, but the people living near it were the only ones affected, but not us living in hilly places. It is only this year that waters have displaced us.
Well, Malawi's Shira River, which flows from Lake Malawi through Mozambique into the Zambezi River, has overflowed its banks and is causing flooding in low-lying areas. Now, in Kenya, nomadic herders are among those suffering the most from recurring drought that kills the livestock they depend on. To make them less dependent on rain, aid programs are teaching Kenya's herders how to farm fish and keep bees. Brenda Molinia reports from Isiolo, Kenya.
The arid and semi-arid parts of Kenya have been in the grips of a cyclical drought since last year that threatens the lives of nearly 2 million people. Pastoral communities who depend on livestock are counting their losses and facing an uncertain food security. But Makai Mamu, a pastoralist turned farmer, hasn't had to worry about how to feed her family during this dry period. She has been rearing fish on her farm for the last 2 years, and it is paying off. As other pastoralists struggle to feed their family during this drought, she has enough to eat and sell.
During the drought, we can't buy food in the market. All the goats are too thin. But with fish, we are happy. Fish only needs the pond water. You can catch a big fish that will feed you and your children.
Fish rearing was introduced to Isiolo, a county in the northern parts of Kenya, in 2019 by the county government in collaboration with the World Food Programme. The initiative is meant to cushion residents from the effects of extreme weather conditions like droughts and floods.
We started off with interventions like the general food distribution, which was a bit reactionary, like after drought or floods, we were giving food to communities. But we then realized over time that it was not sustainable.
The Sustainable Food Systems Program has seen pastoralists like Makai try other types of farming aside from livestock. The county government of Isiolo says diversifying sources of livelihood has helped lessen the impact of droughts that have hit the country and surrounding areas every few years.
I can say we have a good number of people accepting fish as a livelihood, and they are using it to earn other income, to produce other household needs. So right now we have phase 2 that's coming in. We are targeting 40 fish farmers. We are hoping that with time they'll be able to see fish as other livestock.
The program has grown from 15 groups to more than 50, and individual farmers now farm and consume the fish, as well as practice crop farming, hay production, and beekeeping. The program aims to reach close to 1,000 groups in the next 5 years. Brenda Molinya for VOA News in Isiolo, Kenya.
To West Africa now, where some supporters of Burkina Faso's military coup this week were seen celebrating with Russian flags and calling for the country to switch alliances from France to Moscow. While the extent of pro-Russian sentiment in Burkina Faso is unclear, there is no doubt many are fed up with the French efforts to help fight gangs and Islamist militant groups. Henry Wilkins reports from Ouagadougou.
Riding through the streets of Ouagadougou on Tuesday, 2 demonstrators fly a Russian flag, celebrating a military coup in the country a day earlier. They also turned out in Ouagadougou's Place de la Nation to celebrate the military takeover. Some waved a Russian flag and told VOA,
"We don't want no more France. We are here because we need the defense of Russia. France haven't done anything. Who has given us success?"
France has been giving military assistance to Burkina Faso during its 6-year conflict with armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Earlier this month, the leader of neighbouring Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta, welcomed mercenaries into the country from the Russian private security company Wagner, which has close links to the Kremlin. The mercenaries took over a military base in Timbuktu that was vacated by French troops in December. Demonstrators in Burkina Faso carried pictures of Goïta at this week's demonstration, and on January 22nd held a march in solidarity with Mali. Police broke up the gathering using flashbangs and tear gas. Analysts say in recent months there has been growing anti-French sentiment and a pivot towards Russia. Analysts say Mali is using Russian involvement as a bargaining chip after the West African bloc ECOWAS sanctioned the country for refusing to hold democratic elections within the next 5 years.
The Malian military junta is trying to immobilize national feeling, if you like. It seems to have brought the Russians in, or sought to bring the Russians in, as a sort of tool of leverage. It's not entirely clear how much practical military impact could actually bring.
The Russian embassy for Burkina Faso and the military junta both declined to give VOA an interview. Bernard Bermuga, a Burkinabe political commentator, is pragmatic about the situation.
Whether we pair with France or with Russia or any other country is not out of generosity, is not free. They will want something in return. What is being searched for is someone who can help Burkina Faso get out of the situation in which it finds itself.
Activist Francois Biogo attended the demonstration.
The French must let us work things out. We are not against France, but France must manage their affairs and allow us to manage ours. Leave our soldiers. They will have peace of mind and be able to reflect on how to organize and free the people.
Meanwhile, the Russian organization that trains troops in the Central African Republic has offered military support to Burkina Faso. It remains to be seen if Burkina Faso's new de facto leader, Paul-Henri Damiba, will take up the offer. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso.
Now, with all that is going on, Burkina Faso is facing an uncertain political future following the oust of President Roch Marc Christian Kabore by the military junta on Sunday. Now, Africa 54 anchor Esther Gdoyort interviewed reporter Henry Wilkins in Ouagadougou and began by asking about the state and whereabouts of ousted President Roch Kabore.
At the moment, we're still very much in the dark about the whereabouts of President Kabore. It was reported on Monday that he was being held at Camp Sangul Lamizana, the largest military camp in Ouagadougou, where the mutiny, which eventually led to the coup, started on Sunday. There seem to be two parallel narratives, however, one being that he is there, the other being that he's with the gendarmerie, the military police.
We're also learning, Henry, that the junta held a meeting with ex-ministers and warned them not to leave the country or the capital or obstruct the military officers. What more can you tell us about this new directive?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the mayor of Ouagadougou was caught trying to exit the country earlier this week, which may be what's prompted the junta to issue this directive for ministers of the former regime to stay in the capital. The new de facto leader of Burkina Faso, Paul-Henri Damiba, appeared on national television just a few minutes ago to say that they were looking for help and consulting with the former members of the government in order to inform their strategy for taking the country forwards.
You mentioned Colonel Henry Paul Damiba, who is now the new leader of this party that they've formed. But who exactly is Colonel Damiba?
Yeah, so he's a 41-year-old infantry commander. He wasn't necessarily well known within the general public, but he certainly had a reputation within the army as being a competent leader, quite meticulous from what I understand in terms of strategy. We do know that he's written he wrote a book last year on how to deal with terrorism in West Africa, which is of course a massive problem for Burkina Faso. So I think analysts and the general population of Burkina Faso are really waiting to see what he reveals about himself in the coming days, weeks, and months, and beyond.
We've seen members of the public celebrating the ouster of President Kabore. Were there any pointers that a coup was imminent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were a lot of red flags in the last few months, especially that a coup could be on its way. It really all started earlier last year, when there was a major attack, the largest attack that Burkina Faso has seen since its 6-year conflict began, against civilians in the village of Solhan, where an artisanal gold mining site was attacked, and at least 160 civilians were killed. But there was even some debate amongst local media and officials as well that maybe even more than that had been killed, and the government wasn't being totally upfront about the correct numbers.
We had an argument from the military junta that one of the reasons they wanted Mark Kabore out of the presidency is because he could not deal with the Islamic militants and the jihadists in the country. How well can they handle that?
I think that they're going to struggle as well. I don't think that the problems with militancy are going away. A lot of analysts say that the solution to the security problems, not just in Burkina Faso, but in the Western Sahel conflict more generally, is really a development one. The areas of the country which have fallen under control of armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda are also the least developed part of the country. They've been underfunded for decades now, very few investments made there. And I think most analysts agree that until this problem is sorted out, there isn't really a military solution to the problems in Burkina Faso and the Western Sahel.
Well, that was Africa 54 anchor Esther the U.S. speaking to Burkina Faso-based reporter Henry Wilkins. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming a broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Cameroon refugee gives birth to triplets soon after fleeing violence.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Heavily pregnant Fatima Eliane journeyed for 3 days by foot and dug out canoe last month to flee violence in northern Cameroon between herders, farmers and fishermen. Soraya Ali reports.
Fatima Eliane was heavily pregnant when she journeyed for 3 days by foot and canoe last month to flee the violence in northern Cameroon. When she arrived in Chad, the 32-year-old mother of 7 gave birth to triplets in a hospital in the capital, N'Djamena.
Even when I was pregnant in Cameroon, I didn't know I was carrying triplets, but physically I was in pain. I couldn't walk a few meters without sitting down. And when conflict broke out, I said to myself that given my condition, it was urgent that I take shelter with my 7 other children.
Fatima fled her ethnic Muskum fishing and farming village last month when it was attacked by Arab Shoa herders, who she said burned down her neighbours' houses. More than 100,000 Cameroonians have fled the violence between herders, farmers and fishermen. Dozens have been killed in the attacks, which the UN Refugee Agency says is over dwindling water resources. Many flee to nearby Chad for help. This is Fatima's social worker.
You see that this woman has 10 children. With the 3, that makes 10. And her husband has nothing. And you see how their children live. I ask the government to make an effort to help her and her children.
Chad is already home to around 1 million refugees and internally displaced people, and its resources to respond to their needs are critically low, according to UNHCR. As for Fatima, she told Reuters she hopes to earn some money selling cakes at the local market of a town not too far from the refugee camp.
That was Soraya Ali of Reuters reporting. Now, Nestle will start paying cocoa farmers cash if they send their children to school rather than out to tend crops as part of a push to tackle child labor and source all of its cocoa through a fully traceable system. Julian Satterthwaite reports.
Last year, a court in Ivory Coast sentenced 10 people to a decade in jail each for trafficking children to work on cocoa plantations. The kids involved were released and returned home. But child labour remains a huge problem in production of the crop across West Africa, with countries and businesses under pressure to do something. Now Nestle is taking steps to clean up its sourcing of cocoa. It buys hundreds of thousands of tons of the product to make everything from Kit Kat bars to Smarties. The Swiss food giant says it will start paying growers cash if they keep kids in school, instead of putting them in the fields. Monitors from a sustainable trade initiative and other third parties will check the children really are getting their studies. Farmers will be able to get payments of up to $543 per year, or as much as a quarter of the average grower's annual income. The scheme will be extended to all of Nestlé's 160,000 cocoa farmers by 2030. It's part of a push to make sure all its cocoa is fully traceable within a few years. Next year, the firm will launch Kit Kat products made with cocoa produced under the project. Nestlé says they might be more expensive than the regular bars, but it thinks consumers will be ready to pay for a more ethical chocolate.
Well, that was Julian Satterthwaite of Reuters reporting there. Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the U.S. has failed to address Moscow's main security concerns over Ukraine in the written document delivered Wednesday, but he left the door open for more talks to ease simmering tensions. VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Russia had a muted reaction to the U.S. written response to its stated security concerns about Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said this.
As for the content of the document, there is a response that gives hope for the start of a serious conversation on secondary questions. But in this document, there was no positive response to the main question.
President Joe Biden had a phone conversation Thursday with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky thanked Biden for ongoing military assistance, with Russia massing more than 100,000 troops and heavy military equipment along its border with Ukraine. In an interview with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked whether the U.S. and Kyiv agree about how imminent the threat of a major Russian invasion might be.
President Zelensky is right. No one should panic, and no one is. We're looking at the facts. We are acting in a very deliberate way, and we're doing everything we can to make clear to Moscow that it has two paths before it: the path of diplomacy and dialogue to resolve differences peacefully, or the path of aggression, if that's what it chooses, and the massive consequences that will flow from that.
Russia says it is not planning to invade Ukraine and blames the U.S. for escalating tensions. The U.S. says it is coordinating every step with Ukraine and its NATO allies, preparing painful economic sanctions if Moscow invades, including stopping the controversial Nord Stream 2 oil pipeline, which runs from Russia to Germany. Victoria Nuland is the U.S. Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
Earlier, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said her country will join in on tough sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine.
In case of further aggression, the full range of our responses is available, including Nord Stream 2.
With the world watching the Russia-Ukraine border and waiting, the U.S. says the next move is Russian President Vladimir Putin's. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Now, staying in that same neighborhood, China is watching with interest as Russia and the West face off over Ukraine. Beijing is engaged in its own territorial disputes and has offered political support for Moscow. But as Henry Ridgwell reports, China has also invested billions of dollars in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which could be at risk in the event of any conflict.
Western nations have threatened unprecedented economic sanctions against Moscow if it invades Ukraine. If cut off by the West, could Russia look east to China for help?
The policy I think China is likely to take is to do whatever they can to help the Russians to face up to the economic sanctions that the US and Europeans may impose on Russia. Economic links between China and Russia are not really strong enough to replace any break off of economic links between Russia and Europe.
China has offered political support for Moscow in its standoff over Ukraine.
This foreign policy coordination will definitely increase. Because from the Russian perspective, intensification of the military partnership between Russia and China is precisely one of the major pains which Russia can inflict to the United States and NATO.
Meanwhile, China is closely watching NATO and America's response to any Russian invasion.
Even though there's these troop deployments to Eastern European states, no states are talking about directly sending troops into Ukraine itself to defend. And of course, China's taking note of that with some of their own territorial disputes in their own area.
Taiwan is China's biggest territorial dispute, and there is a risk of miscalculation as Beijing watches events unfold in Ukraine, says Steve Tsang.
The Chinese seeing the Americans and the Europeans talking big, but not doing very much about it, which would embolden them over Taiwan and potentially miscalculate what the American responses to a crisis over Taiwan might be.
Despite their mutual rivalry with the US, China and Russia's interests don't always align. Beijing's multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative cuts through several former Soviet bloc states, including Ukraine. A direct rail and ferry freight link opened in 2016, linking China with Ukraine's Black Sea coast via Georgia, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, bypassing Russia. China has also funded infrastructure projects, including a new metro line for Kiev. If Russia invades Ukraine, could Beijing's investments in the region be at risk?
The more immediate impact on the Belt and Road Initiative would in fact be the Russian military intervention in Kazakhstan. And the Chinese government actually have shown that they are quite relaxed and comfortable with that. To them, it's more important to support authoritarian states and autocrats to stay in power, and then for some of them to be closer to Russia than to China at the moment. Over the longer term, things may change.
In the short term, analysts say China is keen to keep a lid on the simmering tensions for at least the next few weeks as it prepares to host the Winter Olympics. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching and have a good weekend.